And a very good morning. Let's have a look through the newspapers, I think. We've got Nigel Nelson and Claire Pearsall with us. We'll have a look at those in a moment. First of all, let's run through today's top stories.
A gunman has killed at least 14 people and wounded at least 25 others at a Prague university yesterday, where the killer himself was a student. It's the worst fatal shooting since Czech independence 30 years ago, but it's not being treated as a terrorist incident.
And the nightmare before Christmas is already happening. The UK braced for the annual travel chaos, but it is set to be even worse in the aftermath of Storm Pia. Adding to that, yesterday's unexpected strikes by Eurotunnel French site staff will add to the trouble disruption of those who want to get back home for Christmas.
Government rose back on their legal migration plan. The earnings threshold to bring foreign family members to the UK will be £29,000 and not the £38,700 previously announced by the Home Office. The new increase will kick in the spring as planned.
And Sir Keir Starmer says he has not ruled out launching nuclear weapons to protect the UK if he should become Prime Minister. Speaking exclusively to GBNEWS, he said he was keen to increase defence spending.
We're clear that the first duty of government is the protection of the country, and so we're very, very clear about that in terms of the resource that must go with that commitment. But there is a NATO commitment here which we will always make sure that we maintain.
Well, we are here with Nigel Nelson, our senior political commentator, and the former Conservative advisor, Claire Pearsall, our favourite husband and wife duo, to go through the papers with us this morning. And Claire, this has caught mine and Anne's eye this morning. It's the front page of The Sun, an exclusive interview with the missing teenager Alex Batty about why he had to come home.
I think this is such a great story, especially at Christmas time. And he's come back to the UK. He's going to live with his nan, who's been granted the custody order to look after him until he's 18. But the thought process of somebody who left the UK at the age of 11 is now a young man. And you look at the photograph of him, I mean, it's a beautiful picture on the front page. He's a really good-looking lad, but he had just had enough of traipsing around and not going to school and having to work to be able to live somewhere, and he really wants to go into computing and the cyber industry.
Good
and
for
he's
him.
he's been learning French, he's been learning another language all by himself, books that he's picked up, people that he's met without proper schooling since the age of 11. And he just decided that he wanted to come home because he realised that this was not a normal existence. And he said he loves his mother dearly, but she was not a very good mother in the sense of all of the other things that a mother brings you.
He said she's a good person, but not a good mother.
A great quote, I thought, from him, which just shows his maturity, that his mum's a good person, but not a good mother.
Yeah.
But equally saying, but I still love my mother. There was no question of that. But it was things like not being able to meet other kids of his own age. But it sounds like he's actually made a very thoughtful decision about, hang on, this is where my life should now go. It can't be ruled by my mother, and that's why he decided to come home.
And do you remember he turned up at a school in France and asked if he could enrol? And they did test him, and they found that he had incredibly good computer skills.
Yes.
He really knew his stuff. They were very, very impressed by him. But he was using a different name, and in the end they couldn't trace him, even though they did tell the police in France.
Oh, that's right. He was using an alias. I think it was Zach was his alias. And because he had no paperwork, no ID documents, he couldn't enrol into the school, which is what prompted, I think, his journey back to the United Kingdom. And he walked for several days, him, his backpack and his skateboard, until he was picked up by a delivery driver at sort of 3 in the morning in the pouring rain, and the story came out. I think after you've been walking for 4 days, you've slept out, you're tired. He felt bad then that he'd given all of this information out. And when you read it, it's absolutely heartbreaking. This is a teenager who should be sitting in his room like every other teenager,
Playing computer games.
Playing computer games, stating that they hate their parents and all the rest of it. And he was worried that his mother and his grandfather would get into trouble. And that was one of his abiding memories, that they are good people. I don't want them to get into trouble. I don't really want to tell people my story, but I also want to be able to go home.
He seems like such a lovely young man, doesn't he? And also so brave, so courageous.
Absolutely, yeah. And again, just to use the word, but maturity again.
Yeah.
Everything, he's thought everything through, which is absolutely fantastic. It wasn't a kind of spur of the moment, I must run away. This was a calculated attempt to get back to what he thought was going to be a normal life.
Yeah, good for
Tell you what,
him.
before we move on, just where's that picture of him and his nan? There.
Yes.
I mean, this is a Sun exclusive, so I'll show you in the paper. But I mean, that's the picture we were all hoping for in the end, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh, it's lovely, isn't
Him and
it?
his nan, they're back together. And look how thrilled she looks.
Oh.
It's just the most brilliant story.
But
What a great Christmas they're going to have.
Oh.
Yeah, that'll be a lovely Christmas. And it will be a documentary, I'm sure, because it's just the most incredible story, isn't
It'll
it?
be a documentary and a drama, won't it?
Yeah, definitely. Nigel, let's have a look at page 4 of the Eye, shall we? And this is Brianna J, just the most horrific story. 2 16-year-olds now have been found guilty of her murder, and now they're going to be named.
Yes, and I think this sounds like the right decision by the judge. Up until now, the 2 killers have only been known as Girl X and Boy Y. And the judge has taken the unusual decision. I mean, they're 16 now, committed the murder when they were 15. That because of the horrific nature of it, I mean, Brianna was stabbed 28 times, that they should be named. It's very unusual to name minors in court cases, and the idea is to try and protect them so after they've finished whatever sentence it is, that they will then be able to live a normal life after that. The judge here says, look, this crime is so horrific, you've got to know who these people are, you've got to understand whatever motivated them to go and do it.
Do you think that's right, though? I mean, do you think that's right that we need to know their names?
Well, I mean,
I'm just thinking it exposes their families, their friends, it exposes their schools, everybody who's ever been in their circle.
It does, and it was quite interesting that Brianna's mother said that she wished no pain on the families, and she was at pains to point out that they should not be targeted for the actions of their children, which I thought, I don't think I would have had the same level of respect, perhaps, as she does at that time. I don't think I would be thinking that rationally. And I think you're right, there is always the risk that the families and the friends and the extended families get tarred with the same brush. But I think in a crime which is this heinous, I think justice outweighs.
Yeah,
all
it depends
of
on the level of
that.
the crime, doesn't it? In the same way that James Bulger's...
Did it
killers
do
were-
us any good to know the names of Venables and Thompson?
Well, I rather think that it meant that there was a focus on them for the rest of their lives. I mean, it was such a horrific crime, as this one is, that it's not something you can just sort of shrug off in later life. And I think that with those 2, it kept a focus on them. They have a different identity now, but it kept a focus on them. And I think that as part of the punishment, if you are guilty of something so horrible, that's when the judge is right to decide to name.
And many people say, why should they be protected by a cloak of anonymity when the crime is quite as horrific as this one? I mean, the judge said in this case that it was the level of public interest that people have a right to know
Yeah,
names.
and there is another point there. I mean, obviously, if you have people who are anonymous, in family courts, for instance, they don't name anybody. You never see any coverage of family courts, so justice is not seen to be done. And I think it's also important to actually name people in situations like this. So the publicity machine does get around them, so people know exactly what has been done in the past and what is going on. And in general terms, children 16 and under shouldn't be named in court. That should be the general principle. This is the exception.
I'm not sure about that. I'm a bit uneasy about it, but mainly because I'm not sticking up in any way for them individually. I just don't know whether it does us any good. Has it done us any good to know about Venables and Thompson? They've got different identities anyway. So I mean, their names don't mean anything, do they?
But also, in this day and age with social media, if you don't name them, the sort of ensuing chaos that you get of everybody naming varying different people
that's a point,
and unsubstantiated names going forward, or indeed the real names and everybody saying, we know it is. You get an awful lot of fake news, you get an awful lot of abuse, you get these sort of mob hatred gangs popping up, and you kind of think if you take the oxygen out of that and put the names out there, they are going to be probably remanded into prison for some considerable period of time, and then they will get their new identities and it will die down. I think if you just take that out of it by saying these are the names, you stop all of that speculation, you stop people being
I do take that point.
unnecessarily.
I absolutely take that point. Yeah.
Well, you will certainly have an opinion on that at home, should those two 16-year-old killers be named. They are going to be, the judge has decided. What do you think about that and what it means? GBViews at gbnews.com. Now, Sir Keir Starmer was speaking to broadcasters yesterday about assisted dying. So let's have a little listen to this clip and then we'll have a discussion about it.
On the question of assisted dying, there are obviously strong views both ways on this, which I respect. I personally do think there are grounds for changing the law. We have to be careful. But it would have to be, I think, a free vote on an issue where there are such divided and strong views.
Of course, this comes off the back of Dame Esther Rantzen, a national treasure, and her fight against lung cancer. She's now at stage 4, and she has spoken about joining Dignitas Clinic in Switzerland and pursuing assisted dying in that clinic. She's urging MPs for a free vote in government. And Sir Keir Starmer, what do you make of his thoughts on that, Claire?
I think it's right that we open up this discussion. We need to be able to have a sensible debate on what we would look at as to be acceptable. It is one of those issues, and I think I've changed my mind. I was always really against it because I thought that it was unnecessary and it would be used as an excuse to get rid of old people and all the rest of it. But when you start sort of removing that and you look at the reasons, and I think Esther Rantzen lays it out very, very well, and it's a very personal thing to her. I think that we need to discuss it, but I worry that with the atmosphere in the House of Commons, with heated debate on both sides, whether you are ever going to come to a conclusion. I think it's going to take somebody very brave to stand up and say we need to change the law. No politician is going to want to do that. And Keir Starmer, for all of the sort of bravery of putting it out there, has still said it will be a free vote, so my hands are clean. And I think that we really need to look at what we do with palliative care in this country. We need to look at care packages around people with terminal illnesses, but also people with disabilities. I don't think we look at that and look at the quality of their life and what we do to help it well enough in this country. So I think we're a little bit far removed from having the law there.
I sort of differ with Claire on this one in the sense that I'm uncomfortable about a law that actually sets all this down. That what we're talking about here is the assisted dying bit. So the help that somebody would give to end their life who can't do it on their own. And yes, there's always the worry about, is it because you want granny's inheritance or something like that? I think that's at the extreme end. The way the law seems to work at the moment is that the police do get involved, but they actually use a lot of common sense about whether it's in the public interest to prosecute or not. And a lot of people simply just get let off. Now, I know that's not perfect in the sense that there's no specific law laid down. It's down to the judgment of police to do it. But it does seem to me that if you take each individual case, that's probably the best way of making a judgment rather than a hard and fast law covering them all.
I mean, the point is, though, that Dame Diana Rigg made the point, and Esther Rantzen is doing the same, that if she takes herself off to Dignitas, she'll have to do it on her own.
Yes,
People who go to Dignitas have to do it, and they die alone, not with their loved ones, because their loved ones face the fear of prosecution.
Yeah.
But that's
And
what I mean
even
about the
going to
common
be
sense.
with them.
But that's the point I'm making is, in a situation like that, with Diana Rigg or say Esther Rantzen, that if one of their loved ones went there, would the police go and prosecute on a thing like that? I mean, it's pretty unlikely when they came back the police would actually take a case against them.
What do you think, Anne?
But, well, I'm completely divided, because I do know that countries like Canada, like Holland, that do this have found that there is an increase in people wanting it, and even children.
Oh.
And then even people who say that they are mentally stressed and can't cope with life anymore. And so the sort of people who are eligible for it and are putting themselves forward for assisted dying tend to be people that you actually never realised it would start to encompass. And a lot of people say, be very careful what you wish for, because it could, in 20 years' time, turn in, we could be a country where young people want it because they simply can't face the world anymore, or people with mental health problems who maybe could be helped in other ways.
Which apparently is already happening in Canada.
Apparently in Canada it is, and they found themselves facing real problems with it. So where do you draw the line? It's, as you said, how do you draw up the law to prevent? Anyway, do let us know your views.
Yeah,
it's a very dismal subject, but thank God there are people like Esther Rantzen who, I mean, she's such an incredible... She's my hero, always has been. I just can't bear the idea that we'll lose her.
Yeah, it's really tough, isn't it?
Yes, it's awful, isn't it?
Yeah.
Shall we move on? It's 9 minutes to 7 already.